Welcome to the Seek First CEO podcast, a community for high-achieving kingdom women committed to seeking God first and keeping God first in all we do. If you believe you're called to impact the world through your gifts, then you're in the right place. Hi, friend. I'm Heather, teacher turned speaker and your host of the Seek First CEO podcast. I'm passionate about helping ambitious, servant-hearted women find their worth in whose they are, not what they do. As a certified master neuroscience life coach, I help you connect the dots between biblical principles and brain science so you can take your thoughts captive and be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I don't do surface, so we go deep here, and we talk about the stuff underneath the surface because I want to help you get to the source of your heart set and mindset roadblocks so you can have breakthrough by aligning your heart and mind with biblical truths. If your heart's desire is to grow in your relationship with Jesus while fearlessly fulfilling your purpose and calling, then let's open up the Word together and see what the Holy Spirit has to say about living your life in flow with Him. Are you ready? Then get excited for today's episode. Hey, sister friend, do you ever meet those people online that you know instantly you were meant to be in each other's lives? Well, today's guest, my new friend, Dr. Jennifer Blossom. I cannot wait for this conversation. We have such a unique story of how we even got connected. And then we were actually supposed to record this episode a couple of weeks ago, and our conversation just turned into this whole God story. So here we are, round two. We are bringing it to you. So Jennifer is a leadership coach, speaker, an occupational therapist, and she is going to bless your socks off today. So welcome to the show.
Heather, I love you so much, and I'm so glad to be here. It's just in our yellow. Like, what is this?
I know. We did not plan this. If you could see us right now, we both have yellow. And oh, it's just so fun. I love the internet. You know,
I love the internet too.
The internet gets such a bad, like everyone's like, oh, social media. And I'm like, no, like social media. I don't remember exactly how we got connected, but I remember finding you, looking at your content, being like, oh my gosh, this girl is reading my diary. This girl knows me. And I don't know, we ended up messaging each other somehow. And here we are.
Here we are. And I felt the exact same. And I'll tell you how we met is I found your podcast as to podcasts you may enjoy or you may like. And I was like, who is this girl? She is like my soul sister in my diary and on the internet. And so that was that. And here we are.
Okay. So this is just a little tip to y'all. Share your story.
Yes.
Just share. The more you put yourself out there, the more people will find you. That is so fun. And if you've thought about doing a podcast, maybe this is your sign. Like,
do it.
Yeah. Okay. So when we originally connected and we're like, oh, we need to do podcast. Goodness gracious, like that last conversation we had, the Lord just started unveiling and revealing things to you. So let's dive in. This is one of your signature topics that you've been talking about recently, but it's so important about this masking that we wear. So I'm just going to let you take it. First of all, before we go into that, maybe you should, friend, introduce yourself to just tell us a little bit more about you.
Yes. Well, no, this is great. I'm so pumped to be here and to have this conversation. So Cliff Note version of my story, born and raised in Alaska. So my family and my husband's family were both homesteaders up to Alaska, grew up in a super hardworking family. My family was in commercial real estate when Alaska was literally not a state. So if you go up there, there's still all these roads that my dad and uncle would ride their bikes around. They're now paved that have my family's grandma's middle names, last name. Like it's a whole thing of like legit homestead. So grew up going to all these sites and buildings and all the things, painting, riding bikes, grew up working really hard. That was a blessing until it became a double-edged sword when I went to college, went to grad school, and equated hard work ethic, striving, achieving with worthiness and with love. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that was my story. And it became my narrative up until about 30 years of age when we moved to Washington State. So my husband and I moved to Washington State about 4 years ago, just ready for growth, ready for opportunity. And the Lord brought us here. And it was in this season of moving when our whole world kind of came crumbling down. I was struggling a lot with anxiety and panic attacks and shared a teeny bit of it, but not much because I was just numbing the whole thing out. And when we moved here, we opened up a pediatric clinic, became the most successful we've ever been, financially speaking, materialistic speaking, all the things the world gauges as success on the outside, and the most broken on the inside, but nobody knew. So I realized in that season how many years I was masking for. So masking in the sense of running from myself, running from truth, running from God, pretending to be somebody I wasn't, while leading online and leading other places, and so out of touch with who I truly was. And it was a season of a really intense panic attack on a run. And I heard all of these gunshots, couldn't get to my husband or my boys, heard this insane voice that was like, why don't you go kill yourself? And Heather, I'm not kidding you. I was like, what? Like I would never think that. I would never say that. And it just came out of nowhere, but it was Satan. And I didn't tell anybody about that for almost 3 years. It was 2.5 years. And I lived in this internal hell of making sure I was safe. I was running all these scenarios, like OCD check-ins with myself to make sure I wasn't insane, to make sure I was safe, to make sure I didn't have any motives, and just kept running these scripts over and over and over and over. And I was more and more and more and more and more afraid of myself. And in that season, I kept having all these panic attacks and kept making all these decisions to run away from myself and to numb out because I was so scared of being with me. And so eventually I just feel like everything kept imploding and I had to get help. So I started therapy, started marriage therapy, started all the things, and completely broke down my life to the ground zero, got rebaptized, figured out like who God was. I thought I knew who God was. I had no idea. I had no idea. And in this amazing process of unmasking, discovering who I am in God's truth, He has shown me who I truly am, and now get to be this incredible vehicle to help other women. I mean, that is a dramatic story, but like, I don't expect other women to have that dramatic of a story, but I feel like walking through hell, literal hell. And there's like so many side stories we'll have to go about over someday, of like the things, Heather, that I spiritually experienced, of like, talk about chains being broken. It was insane. He set me free. And now to help women unmask in this, it's my greatest gift. So that's the story you never knew.
So good. Oh, come on. So good. Let's just, oh, you said you were afraid of yourself. This is something that I find a lot of women I work with, and maybe the way that I would word it is they don't trust themselves.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're sharing that, because in order for us to fulfill the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, you cannot be at war with yourself.
You can't.
You cannot.
You cannot.
So how did you, and there's many ways to phrase it. How would you even word that? Like, how did you come to that realization that I'm afraid of myself and I need to move from that state to,
Yes.
I mean, we could say like self-love, we could say
Yes.
safe, we could say all these things. How would you describe that? Because, and I have to say, because through my own counseling, I went through my own journey and my own trauma. And as I was coming back, right, that was my theme. It was like, this is the comeback. I'm coming back. And I gave her this phrase that, I think this is like my comeback season. I'm just coming back to Jesus. And she very quickly like paused me and she said, sweetie, she said, I don't think you're coming back to Jesus. And I'm like, what? Because that sounds so spiritual and so beautiful. And she's like, Jesus never left you. You've never left Jesus. Actually, this is where you met him, in the valley, right? She said, what if it's you're coming back to yourself? And that's, I think, similar to what
100%.
you're sharing. And I didn't understand what that meant until I understood what that meant. So tell us a little more about that.
That is so spot on. And I had this moment in like this beautiful play, like just season of life in Costa Rica, when I realized, and like God showed me this like vision of walking right next to the water. And I felt like him say, Jenny, you've been walking next to me your whole life, but you've never fully jumped in. And so it was understanding who I was in God's eyes and how much he loved me that I found who I was. And so it was knowing who I was in Christ, my true identity, that then I realized, like you were saying, Heather, like the mask that I had over my eyes, I couldn't see truth. I couldn't speak truth. I couldn't live truth. I was so blocked on all these areas. And when he helped me take all those masks off and I could finally see who I was through him and in him, then I was able to move forward. And I think that's where we get in so much trouble today in the secular world, is just we're trying to muscle our way into figuring out who we are in the name of self-idolization. And it's just like, man, the rate of mental health and emotional dysregulation and loneliness and all these things have never been at the record high they are now. And I'm wondering if there's some type of correlation with the idolization of self and trying to figure this out. We're not meant to carry this all ourselves, you know?
Yes, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. But let's just talk about being a high achiever. There's no time for rest. Rest was a four-letter word to me. It was like a swear word. Like, we don't do that.
Yes.
Lazy people rest. Lazy people who aren't ambitious or go-getters. So I love this idea, this unmasking, because what I hear you saying was nobody knew. They look at your life and think you have a great marriage, you have beautiful children, you've got a successful business. And so on the outside, it looks like Jenny's got it going on. I want life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet you were feeling
broken, lost, all the things. And Heather, that was the hardest part in coming back, right? Like your life implodes, you take some pain, like having to come back and having to let my shame go and let my guilt go because I was living a facade. I was living a lie, this perfect life online and leading people. That was the worst part, is I had to look at myself in the mirror and accept that I was not truthful, and to be able to have to swallow that in humility and to never do that again was the hardest part for me to not beat myself up with, my past.
Yeah.
And there's freedom in that, letting go.
Okay, so that's so good, because there's just freedom starts with honesty.
Yeah.
Right. And no matter what mask you're wearing, no matter what you're trying to live up to, if we actually lived up to what Jesus paid the price for, our true identity as daughters of a king, as queens in a kingdom, a royal priest, all those things, really, we wouldn't have that pressure. It's more of a privilege and honor, but freedom starts with honesty.
It does. And being honest with ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Shame you mentioned that word shame. I find that has been a huge part of my story. And shame I didn't know that though, right? Because I had all these accolades. I had all of these really high achieving success stories that people would say, everything you touch turns to gold. And you get praise for the good things, right? I'm sure when you were building the business, again, everyone can look on the outside of your life and think you have it all figured out. And so it's almost like shame gets buried so deep underneath the trophies and the success and the reputation that you have, that you really don't have to deal with it as long as you keep that up.
Yeah.
Like, you just keep going after the next thing. You don't actually have to deal and get honest with down here, because you're like chasing the next high.
You're just exactly. It's the high achiever dopamine, because every hit we get of an accolade or of recognition or of this trip or advance, whatever it is, it's that false hit of dopamine. But what it is, it's artificial. So it's filling us with this emotional bloat that continues to numb us out and connect us even further away from who we are. And that's where the masking comes into play. So after, I just worked through all of this and really stepped into, okay, gotta let that go and step into like who I know I'm truly am in Christ and what I'm here to do. I found, Heather, that in the world of high achievers, there's really it's not the end all be all, but there's three big masks that I see a lot of us struggle with. And within those masks, more like mini masks within, but these are like three really big umbrella masks that many of us can cling to and hide behind. And I would love to share those with you and then really kind of unpack
Let's
why
do
we
it.
wear these masks and what
Yes,
to
I
do.
got my pen ready, girl.
All right, get ready, girl, because it's gonna be good. So the first mask is looking at the perfect performer mask. This is the mask that is this constant pursuit of flawlessness, of competence, of achievement. It's this pressure to conform, to be the best, to not take no for an answer. You were talking about like we can't rest. We got to go, 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 go. And what happens is when we wear this, everything's perfect. I'm the best at what I do. La 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 la. We get disconnected from ourselves, from reality. We have poor self-awareness. We have burnout. We make poor decisions, and we're easily swayed to make micro decisions that can lead us off our true north. And over time, those micro decisions, and when our guard's down, boom, can take us down hard. And that's where Satan can hit hard too. And so that perfect performer is a big performance. It's a big facade for the approval and the validation from others, because we don't have that from within. We do, but we're seeking it out externally.
Heather, circa 2018. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
There we go. Yes.
Yeah.
High performer. Why?
Yeah.
For me, performance meant safety. It meant love and it meant value. And so I didn't know that. And I don't think I grew up, I think that's the thing that I always, when we have these revelations, right? It's like, oh my goodness. And I think immediately shame can come in. What I have learned to have to do, right, is get curious around why that maybe happened or why that was my pattern rather than critical.
That is so true. Like the gentle curiosity. And I probably should have prefaced this, like, as I share these masks, have a compassionate heart with yourself, because you don't know what you don't know. And what the coolest thing is like, now we get to gently look at these masks and see them as a mirror in our own life and begin the work. That's the blessing, is that we get to start this work for ourselves and we don't have to be numbed out anymore. And we've done the best we could with what we had. And so when we have that frame of mind, instead of, oh, I'm going to beat myself up because I'm having this perfect performer mask on, or these other masks, like, we don't know. You can't change what you don't know. So the blessing is you're learning this today.
And your normal has just been your normal for whatever reason. And when I started learning some of these things, the root causes of why these things, it was just my constant prayer to the Lord was, God, show me where my normal is not your normal, where it's not kingdom. Just show me where my normal has become not in alignment with kingdom truth, because you don't know what you don't know. And I love that you said that. Can we just, if any of this is resonant, I think Jennifer and I can like talk about these things so candidly because we have done years of work in this area.
Yeah.
But if this is kind of your first, like, oh my goodness, offer yourself compassion and curiosity and no criticism, no what's wrong with me. More so just curiosity. Okay, that's mask number one. Heather's 2018. Thank you very much. All right, tell us about this second mask.
Okay, and I've had all three of these masks have taken me down. So this is a safe place. The second mask is the unwavering strong leader mask. So this is like operating at our strongest, like most masculine point of being. We have this front on that we have to have this strong composure despite any challenges. We can't show any vulnerability. And what we do is we begin to suppress any and all emotions to avoid appearing weak, because we can't be a weak leader if we have emotions. Like, heaven forbid we have emotions. And what happens is this leads to emotional exhaustion. It leads to lack of empathy. It leads to us focusing more on those short-term goals or short-term gains or short-term hits of dopamine without thinking about long-term consequences, right? Like 12 steps ahead, like, where could this decision lead? And so we lack that resilience for growth. And over time, it leads to the derailment of what our true north is. And so this isn't an excuse to show up with emotional laundry and to show up emotionally irresponsible, but it's having self-awareness of what our emotional needs are, why we feel certain ways, how to process through, how to move through, how to cultivate greater, stronger emotion, and to not let harder emotions throw us off. It's the contrast of life, the high and the low. We know how to move through the low, and we embrace the high, and we don't get shook up by any of it. And so it's the unmasking that unwavering strong leader, knowing who we are, knowing our baseline, and being able to move through that.
So good. Okay, so the question that kind of pops up for me is so hard to answer when you're in this, when you're wearing this mask, is what do you need? Because as a leader, you're the one providing everything for everyone else. And so you're actually not used to having someone ask you, what do you need? Because people are always taking and receiving from you. And I think that was for me to get to the end of myself in this masking was when I literally needed Jesus. And for me, that was I knew that that was the only solution to the pain and the brokenness and the healing that I needed. And that was probably the first time, Jennifer, that I actually admitted that I needed God, because for me, this whole unwavering leadership, that independent woman, was also safe for me, that I didn't have to rely on a man or a business partner or anyone else. And so I took on that heavy responsibility that I was the best answer to all of my problems. And that I couldn't rely on other people, because truth is, people let me down. And enough times that or they didn't do it the right way, or they didn't do it quick enough, or fill in the blanks, right? And so for me, that unmasking of that leadership role was me admitting that not only do I want help, I actually need it in order for me to fulfill my role well, because we're not meant to do everything on our own.
We're not. We're not. And asking for help and knowing what you need and delegating, empowering to others, and then receiving the help. I mean, help can come in so many different forms. It's what's going to make you an incredible leader for sustainable success, and success in how you define it, because we can all get on the fast track to burnout success, but we see where it's a dumpster fire. And so this is the new era of leadership, is being emotionally intelligent, emotionally aware, knowing what you need mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and honoring that and receiving that so you can then give it.
I don't want you to miss what she just said. You can have success without God. You can. But at what cost?
Right.
And eventually, what you realize when you have that kind of success is you cannot sustain it unless you're literally going to drive yourself, your body. For me, my body it hated me. I got an autoimmune disease that was stress induced, that my body was telling me I can no longer literally store all of this stress. And so sustainability, that is part of that independence, which is so sexy in the world. Oh, you're such a, the world really looks at that and glorifies it. Meanwhile, they don't know that some of these women, you and myself probably included, we are the women crying ourselves to sleep at night, having panic attacks on a run.
Yeah.
Because you haven't learned how to ask for help. And there's layers to this, right? There's so many layers.
So many layers.
It usually goes back to childhood and the role that you played in your home, and were your parents emotionally able to hold your emotions, or were they available for you to be able to ask for help? Or maybe, you were, and this isn't necessarily my story, but were you shamed when you did ask for help? Where along the way did we learn as young girls that we just needed to do it on our own?
Right.
And that's so much of that. I think it's just how the enemy works, because he takes advantage of the most innocent and the most vulnerable. And then we end up becoming adults who look like we have these successful lives and these perfect things. And yet when there's an absence of peace, there's an absence of the Holy Spirit.
Exactly. And that's where he will strike. That's where the enemy will strike, when we're weak and where we're weak. And that's why these conversations, Heather, I am just so grateful that we're having them, because we can fall into this pressure cooker of a trap to continue living the lie, essentially, of everything is fine when it's not. And like you said, you can be successful without God, but to what prevails? Something will implode. For us, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, with your marriage, like something's going to give or multiple things will give. And so it's just recalibrating and unmasking, if you will, and rebuilding.
Yeah, it's like what profits a man to gain the whole world and
But
lose
lose his soul.
his soul. And so that's really what we're inviting you into is soul work. Allowing, I love 3 John 1:2 is like one of my favorite, it's my anchor verse to my business is may you prosper in all things and be in good health as your soul prospers. Which
Yes.
just be on this journey of, okay, what is your soul? Because we read about it in the Bible, and that's what this is. This is, what does your
Yes.
soul know?
Yeah.
Does your soul know that it can't rely on anyone, or does your soul know that you have somebody who you can always lean on, right? Curl up in the Father's lap and just tell him what you need. That was a big surrender moment for me to actually admit that I needed help. I needed God. I needed Jesus. And that was humbling.
It's very humbling. It's very humbling. Yeah.
And I want you to like catch this. This is from 2 Christian girls who are raised to know the Lord, right? And so there is no shame in any of this. There is freedom.
There is freedom in it. There is freedom in it, even if it doesn't feel like freedom at first. Like you have, I think for me, Heather, like, I think it was at least 6 months of like, after like recommitting my life to the Lord, of letting go of the shame of how could I have let myself get that low, like when I was a believer, and it was just all this pressure I put on myself. And so it is like releasing the shame, releasing the guilt over and over and over. And so now I'm like, oh, I am in freedom, even though I've always been in freedom. I just didn't feel like it at first.
You didn't know it. Okay. And I love it because same here. I went down this rabbit hole of like, the question often that I ask, and I don't ask this anymore because I've learned it was what's wrong with me? How could I have gotten here? Oh my gosh. And there was a lot of shame in the revealing of what was actually going on. So I just want to remind you, if you're listening, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. There is no condemnation. God's not going to reveal things to you to shame you and to make you feel like you're the worst Christian. He's revealing things to you so that you can walk in alignment with truth and freedom, because that's what Jesus came to set the captives free. And sometimes we are the ones keeping ourselves captive, but we don't know it because that's been our life. That's been our story. That's been our role to play. And if there's an absence of peace and freedom, then there is something off. Okay, tell us the third mass. This is so good.
This is the work of walking through the fire and being obedient to let God have your soul. Like I feel like I was wrestling with him my whole life, but didn't even realize it. And when I finally give it all over, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my work. So it's amazing. Like I feel like walking through the hardest challenges of my life to now be able to use this to be such a blessing for his kingdom is just like, praise you, Jesus. All right, tangent, third mask. Okay. Third mask is the selfless caretaker. And this is especially true for moms, but if you're not a mom, there's still people who need you. So we prioritize other people's needs and their well-being over our own, whether it's to support or nurture our team or organization, our family, our community, volunteering here, giving there. I mean, we can wake up and have people needing from us in email and DMs every day, all day long. But what happens is we are so used to giving that we neglect our own needs in the process. And so this is not a novel concept, but we wear this frazzled burnout. Even if we don't show it on the outside, we're going a zillion miles an hour on the inside. If we have got a zillion tabs open and we're spinning here and we're spinning there, and it all begins to implode internally. And so if we're selfless in how we are taking care of ourselves, we can't sustain that pace before something gives. And so it's learning how to prioritize your needs and others. And like you were saying, Heather, what do I need? And most times we don't know what we need because we've never been taught, or we grab onto what other people are doing because we think it looks good on their life. It doesn't work for us. It doesn't fill us up.
That's so good. And yeah, when I, take all those personality tests, it's always like you're super driven and you're super servant hearted, right? So I feel like that's kind of those first 2 masks, that like super driven, high performer, high achiever. And then that last one is, oh wait, but I have a servant heart and I want to be a great mom and I want to be a good leader and therefore you will sacrifice. One of my favorite quotes, I don't know where this came from, but stop lighting yourself on fire to keep other people warm.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, because that's what this selfless caretaker, that's what she does.
Yeah.
She lights herself on fire, meanwhile, just to keep everyone else warm, and she's dying. She's crumbling, but
Love that.
she can't be strong because even the people who were called to serve, if we're doing it from a half empty cup, it's like, oh, well, are we actually present? Are we actually? And that was for me, a lot of motherhood for me personally is where I started to recognize something's off
Me
because
too.
I'm not really present with my kids, although I want to serve them. Or maybe for me too, when they ask for help, I was like, you don't need my help. That independent like
Yeah.
person, little Heather that was like super independent, like nobody, I don't, but I'm like, no, I'm their mom. Like, it's okay for them to ask me for help. Why does that bother me? And again, I
Yeah.
went through the shame of that. And then I got curious around why does it bother me when people ask me for help? And there was just tons of revealing in that. But I love that selfless because
Mhm.
that's like the one that seems good. Like, oh, that's okay. Because let's talk about that. Because I think sometimes we can take scripture out of context in a lot of ways. And that, die to selves, be selfless, be like Jesus, all of that. But what I see when I look at Jesus is he had his own self-care.
He did.
He got
He would
away.
go away from the crowd. Like he retreated.
Yep. He'd go spend time with the Father. He would
Yes.
maybe only be with three of the disciples, or like he got away from the crowds. He took a nap in a boat when the
Yeah.
storm was, right?
Yes.
So like I look at that and I'm like, oh, that was Jesus's self-care. That was
Yeah.
how he got filled back up so that he could be selfless and he could
Exactly.
serve people. And so what would that look like for you? What
Right.
and let's talk about that. What does self-care look like? We were talking a little bit about that before we started recording. I was like, I had a 90-minute massage this week and it just loosened up all the junk in me. I feel a little nasally, but that's self-care for me. And I love that you even said that you don't even call that self-care. It's more like your nervous system. It is
Reset.
self-care. Yeah, it's like your reset.
Yes. It
Yeah.
totally is. And I feel like it can get such a superficial feel these days, but self-care is essentially, you can call whatever you want. Self-care, nervous system reset, nervous system regulation. Like if we aren't taking time to plug back in, we can only go around the track so many times before we bottom out. And so it's figuring out. And so for me, Heather, I'm in this season of complete retraction. Like I am so selective with who we hang out socially with, how much time we give our energy to. Like I'm in a season of self-care, which means I want to be at home all the time. Like I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to be around people. I want to be at home with my family, with my kids, reading a book, going to the chiropractor, getting a massage because my scapula is like glued down, like those types of things. Like that is self-care to me. Learning about my body, like learning about reflexology of the foot and like just like all these things of like, I need this to release here. Like it's getting curious of what I need in this season. And I think it changes. Like we have very young boys at home right now. And so it's just this season of if we're not doing sports at night, like I just want to be home. And so that's to me, that's self-care. And so I think it changes. I know it changes like as we grow throughout our lives and through our businesses and in different seasons. So again, it's knowing and being curious with who you are, what your nervous system, your body, your mind, your emotional system, like all of these systems need to recalibrate itself is essentially what it is.
Yes. And I said this the other day to somebody, saying no, sometimes
Yeah,
that's self-care.
exactly.
Saying
Exactly.
no to all the offers, to even if they're good things, right? Or right, hanging out with friends or doing the things. But if you are in a state where this is your season of, I need solitude, I just want to be with my family, or yeah, saying no sometimes is the best form of self-care. And that's hard for somebody who wants to people please and say yes and
Yes.
be whatever for whomever. Okay, these masks are so good. So we've got the perfect performer, right? The unwavering leader,
Mm-hmm.
and then this selfless caretaker.
Yes. Yes. So I know we're almost out of time, but what I would love to do is just leave our audience with a few questions to start the unmasking process. We're going to do part two. I want to have you come onto our show. So I know we'll share more about that later. But what I want to leave them with is just something they can put in their journal to start the unmasking process. Because this is a process, and this is like podcast version. So I know, Heather, that me and you are gonna collab on something, and I feel like we can create something just so incredible for the listeners. But what I want to do is give them something to start with today, so they can begin like the planting of the seed and the unmasking of the layers. When I first did a keynote on this, my husband was like, the acronym is shed, but I thought it was like a shed, like a tool shed. And I was like, babe, no, it's like shedding the layers. And so I always say, okay, we're going to talk about the shed. It's the unmasking process, but it's not a shed, like a dude, like a man shed. It's like, we're shedding the layers. So
it is like an onion. And I love that analogy because, and before you get into the questions, I want to encourage you. Your job is not to go digging to figure out what's wrong with you. Your job is to get curious with a safe father who loves you, who is calling you higher, to just get curious. And so don't feel like you have to peel back every single layer. Like today, I love journal prompts. All right, give it to them.
Okay, so we're going to write SHED right in our journal. The S stands for self-reflection. The S stands for self-reflection. And this is asking yourself if you are more focused right now on internal gains or external gains, and why. So thinking about how you see yourself, what's driving yourself for this like flawless projection, and really getting curious of where your heart and where your motives are. So are you focused more on external gains right now or internal, and why? So that's a loaded question. And again, like you were saying, Heather, meet yourself with compassion. This is just about curiosity. It's getting to know yourself better and developing a deeper relationship with yourself. That's a really beautiful thing when you can be your own best friend instead of your hardest critic. So having that gentle compassion with yourself as a friend is huge. The H is honoring authenticity. Honoring authenticity. So this is asking yourself, what is my heart's truest desire? This is getting to know who you are, like we talked about earlier, through God's eyes at your core, and what is that desire that He has placed in your heart? So when you start this question, you can look at, okay, I have no idea what that is. Well, you can look at, well, what's currently working right now? What's not working right now? How am I feeling? What is it in my soul that I know I'm here to be to be? And that's a loaded question. And sometimes it's like, I don't even know where to start with that. But if you do some digging, like, and like you were saying, like not with what's wrong with me, but what do I love? Like what makes me me? What are my gifts? What are my strengths? What are my talents? There's so much truth when we begin to develop that piece of us.
Yeah. And I think in that question, there's no wrong answer.
There's no wrong answer because you're exactly who you're meant to be.
Yeah.
And all your amazing quirks and strengths and weaknesses and like, it's just who you are. And that's what we love that about you. The E, this one's really important because as we begin to do this work, we can expect resistance. The brain loves the nice traveled pathway of the neural pathway that you have been thinking and feeling for years and years and years. And anytime we begin to change that pathway by thinking new thoughts, by trying new habits, you're going to have that cognitive dissonance in your brain, that resistance as you begin to build new neural connections, neural highways, neural pathways. The brain has a beautiful property called neuroplasticity, and it's our ability to rewire itself. And I know you talk about that. And as we begin to reshape how we think and how we feel and how we do, we can expect resistance, and we don't have to make it a problem. And so if you can think about, okay, I'm going to embrace resistance here. How might resistance show up in my life as I begin to learn to unmask? We can plan for that. And then we can plan scenarios of how to overcome that. And we don't have to get mad at ourselves for it because we can expect it. And sometimes we don't know how to expect it, and that's okay too. But if we can expect resistance and then embrace it with a kind heart and just move through it, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. I always say in the coaching sessions where, often at times our brain just shuts off and says like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. And that's a safety valve because you don't have to go there. But what I always say is lean in to that resistance, like lean into that, because our nature is to like lean back and stay away. Yeah. When if we just got curious and had compassion and leaned a little bit into it,
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Expect resistance, expect it, and then be kind to it.
Yes. And then it's a perfect segue to our last one is the D is decide. You simply decide, like, what's my intention? What are my thoughts going to be? Am I letting mental chatter take over, or am I choosing every single day to show up as the woman that God has called me to be and step into that? And sometimes we have to redefine our core values. Sometimes we have to realign our thoughts or our actions over and over and over all day long with this. But we're not what our past says. We're not what we've done. We're not who we've been. We are who we are free in Christ, and being able to decide that and recommit to that every single day, and then align your thoughts and your actions and your habits with that over and over and over again. Over time, you begin to reshape those neural pathways, and you step into and you become and you shed that layer of that version of you and into this new version, and then you become this new version, and then guess what? You got to shed that version. It's this whole process over and over and over again. It's this evolution throughout your life, and it's never done. And that's the beautiful part of this.
Oh, that's so good. And I'm so glad you said that, because I think a lot of the times when women come into my world, they're like, okay, I'm going to learn this, then it's going to be one and done. I'm like, oh, no. The whole new level, new devil. I teach new glory. God wants to take us from glory to glory. I teach new glory, new story. And so it's like shedding that old story that's gotten us to where we are today. And we can honor that and be thankful for that. But it's really understanding, okay, now that God's calling me to this next level of revelation or freedom or my true identity, it's like, are we willing to go back through the process again of this shed?
Yes.
And all of those things. This is so good. And this actually tees up so perfect. When we first started recording, like, I don't know, we'll just see where it goes. This leads perfectly into what I teach, from the shed to the next. And so, this is so good.
Perfect.
Jennifer, yeah, this is perfect. Thank you for sharing this. We hope that this has just opened your eyes to hear two women who love the Lord, and we just want nothing more than you to walk in the fullness and the freedom that Jesus paid the price for you to live. And so if there's we know by our fruit, right? So if there's lack of joy, peace, like if you are all the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit, right? Okay, well, it's time just to get curious around these three different types of masks. And then just really leaning into the S, the H, the E, the D, and just, you owe it to yourself. Give yourself. I know, again, talking about these high achievers, it can be a challenge to slow down and rest. So as we leave this episode, what would you say to the woman who is like, I don't have time to journal, I don't have time to rest, all of that? Because I think that's the part that I'm like, okay, it's so great. This whole podcast was incredible. But if you do nothing with it,
nothing changes. Nothing changes.
If nothing changes, yes. So what is your best tip for the person to actually take action on this stuff?
Create a power sentence. A power sentence is something that you can tangibly grab onto every single day. Sometimes I will have one power sentence for my entire week, and I will write it down on a sticky note or in my planner, and I put it somewhere where I can see it, and I anchor into that truth every single week. So for me, Heather, this is a season where I'm really opening up, learning how to receive. And so my power sentence for actually the whole month has been, it's safe to receive. It's safe to receive. And it's almost clicked in, and it's not quite there yet. And so I anchor into that power sentence. And from that, I'm able to see it all day long and marinate in it and journal things out in it. If I create the space to do that, and I can't shit over myself, but I try to most days. But that's the thing, is like, I'm not going to create this pressure on myself. Most days I journal this out, and I'm in it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 minute, whatever it is. If I don't journal it out every day, I'm at least thinking about it. And so it's an intentional thought of, getting quiet in your car when you're driving to wherever. I used to always overconsume over and over, like podcast, books, and I'm so busy in my mind. Taking one of your commute paths for just 5 or 10 minutes, just to think, to be, to pray, to anchor in, is an awesome practical way to just continue to anchor into this whole process.
So good. I love this. And if you're struggling with that, I love that I'm able to receive. That's so good. Maybe it's, I'm safe. I am safe to rest. I'm safe to lean into this resistance. I'm safe, because your body needs to feel safe. You need to feel safe in order to go somewhere. And so that is such a perfect sentence for just to lean in. Oh my gosh. So good. Okay. Well, stay tuned for part 2, because we could probably have our own podcast. Just in
Literally,
general.
we could.
But we're going to do part 2 of this episode of this unmasking and walking in the freedom on Jennifer's podcast. So
Yeah.
we will link that in the show notes below, and every way that you can get in touch with her. Go follow her on social, all the things, and stay tuned for part 2.
Oh, I love you, Heather. Thanks, girl.
Thank you so much for listening to the Seek First CEO podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, can you do a sister a solid? Subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode, and leave a review so that other Kingdom entrepreneurs can find the soul-changing content that we share here. Thank you for being part of this community and for tuning in each week.